They said she was just a diner owner, a quiet woman who minded her own business on the edge of town. But in a single moment, under flashing blue lights and the crackle of police radios, she became something far more. When she stepped between a frightened biker and the officers surrounding him, no one expected what would follow. By morning, her small diner would become the center of a storm that shook the whole community. A place where loyalty, prejudice, and humanity collided. Because sometimes, standing up for what's right doesn't just change your life. It changes everyone's. Marilyn James had run the Silver Spoon Diner for nearly 20 years. To most who passed through town, she was known for her steady hands, her quiet smile, and her biscuits that melted like butter on the tongue. The diner sat just off Highway 47, where truckers, locals, and the occasional group of bikers would stop for coffee before heading back into the endless sprawl of the desert. She never cared much for the noise of the world outside, politics, protests, divisions. Her place was neutral ground. People came hungry, they left whole, and that was enough. But lately she'd noticed the edges of things starting to fray. Conversations turned sharp, neighbors whispered. Some customers stopped coming after she hired a young Latino cook. Others complained about the type of crowd the place was attracting. Still, she kept her head down. She'd worked too hard to let bitterness cross her counter. That morning, though, felt different. The sunlight was brutal, white, unforgiving. The radio hummed quietly behind the counter when a deep rumble of engines broke the calm. 2 motorcycles pulled into the gravel lot, big, heavy machines that made the windows tremble. The riders looked worn and road-dusted, their jackets marked by long miles and louder stories. One of them nodded at her through the glass, polite but guarded. She didn't know their names, didn't need to. All she saw were tired men who needed a meal. But within minutes, the sound of another engine, this time a police cruiser, rolled up behind them. What began as an ordinary morning was about to turn into something no one in that town would ever forget. The first thing Marilyn noticed wasn't the siren. It was the silence that followed. When the patrol car rolled to a stop, its radio still crackling faintly, the 2 bikers stiffened. They didn't move, didn't speak. The taller one's hand hovered near his belt. Not in defiance, but in unease, as if he already knew how this might look to the men stepping out of that car. 2 officers approached, one young and visibly tense, the other older, with a stare that carried both authority and suspicion. The older man's voice cut through the air, calm but edged. IDs, now! From inside, Marilyn watched through the window, heart tightening. She'd seen scenes like this before, not here, but on the news, in the whispers of people who said it could never happen in our town. Yet here it was, unfolding in the middle of her parking lot. The bikers complied without a word. One of them, the taller one with the frayed denim jacket, looked anxious, glancing toward the diner as if searching for something human to hold on to. The officers circled them, checking plates, asking questions that didn't sound like routine. The older one's tone grew sharper, his stance harder. Marilyn stepped closer to the door, towel still in her hand. She couldn't hear every word, but she caught the tone. Accusation dressed as authority, tension disguised as procedure. When the officer grabbed the biker's arm and shoved him against the bike, something in her snapped. The bell above the diner door jingled as she stepped outside. "Is everything okay here, officer?" Her voice was calm but steady, the kind that made people listen. Both men turned toward her, startled. The officer's jaw tightened. "Ma'am, please step back inside." But she didn't. She stood her ground, apron dusted with flour, eyes unwavering. "He's done nothing wrong. You can ask for papers without shoving him." For a second, time seemed to stop. Even the desert wind went still. The biker looked at her like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. A stranger. A black woman standing between him and a badge. The officer hesitated, perhaps realizing that the eyes of the diner and his partner were now on him. He released his grip, muttered something about routine checks, and walked back toward the cruiser. The younger one followed, clearly uneasy. Marilyn's heart pounded, but she didn't move until they drove away. When they were gone, she turned to the bikers and simply said, "Coffee's fresh. Come inside." They nodded, silent and shaken, and followed her in. Inside the diner, the air felt heavy. The other patrons pretended to eat, avoiding eye contact. The two men sat quietly at the counter, one of them whispering a quiet, "Thank you." She only nodded, setting two steaming mugs in front of them. To her, it wasn't about sides. It was about decency, the kind that shouldn't need courage. But that simple act, that refusal to look away, would ripple farther than she could imagine. By the next morning, the town and her little diner would never be the same. By sunrise the next morning, Marilyn's diner didn't sound the same. It started with a distant growl, the kind that rolls across the desert before you even see it. Then another, and another. Within minutes, the sound became thunder. Engines echoed off the highway, one after another, until the whole horizon shimmered with chrome and dust. At first, she thought it was some rally passing through. But when the first riders turned into her lot, she saw the patches on their jackets, the same emblem worn by the man she'd helped the day before. Then came more, dozens, then hundreds. The gravel crunched under the weight of hundreds of bikes as men and women parked shoulder to shoulder, silent, steady, and intentional. Inside, the few early customers stared wide-eyed. The cook dropped his spatula. Even Marilyn froze for a moment, not in fear, but disbelief. She'd seen crowds before, but nothing like this. The first man through the door was the same biker from yesterday. He looked different now, not like a stranger, but like someone carrying a message. He removed his sunglasses, nodded respectfully, and said softly, "Ma'am, we heard what you did." She didn't know what to say. The riders filled the diner, but not one of them raised their voice or acted out. They ordered breakfast, tipped generously, and cleaned up after themselves. Some shook her hand, others just smiled. The parking lot looked like an iron sea, hundreds of engines idling in unison, a kind of wordless salute. Outside, patrol cars lined the opposite side of the street. Officers watched from a distance, unsure of what to make of it. No one crossed the line. There was no violence, no shouting, just presence, a message written not in anger, but in unity. For years, Marilyn had seen how division could twist people apart. But now she was watching something else. Loyalty that had no color, gratitude that didn't ask for permission. She hadn't meant to start anything. She'd just done what she thought was right. But sometimes, doing right in a small corner of the world sends echoes that no one can control. By midday, the diner's parking lot looked like a scene from another world. Chrome and leather glinting under the sun, engines idling in reverent rhythm. Townsfolk gathered at a distance, whispering, filming, trying to make sense of it all. Some called it intimidation. Others called it protection. Marilyn called it gratitude. She moved through the crowd with quiet grace, refilling coffee cups and sharing smiles like she'd done for decades. The bikers didn't need speeches or thanks. Their presence said everything. In their own way, they were repaying a debt, not for the coffee or the kindness, but for the courage to stand up when no one else did. As the afternoon wore on, one by one they mounted their bikes and rode off into the desert wind. No chaos, no confrontation, just a sound that faded like a promise kept. When the last tail light disappeared over the horizon, the diner seemed to exhale. News of what happened spread quickly, headlines twisting the story, some praising her, others calling it reckless. But those who were there knew the truth. It wasn't about sides, colors, or uniforms. It was about a moment when someone refused to look away, when humanity outweighed fear. That night, Marilyn sat alone by the window, coffee cooling beside her. The lot was empty again, but it didn't feel lonely. The world outside still had its noise, its anger, its division, but something had shifted. Even in the smallest town, a single act of courage could ripple across the map. Sometimes change doesn't come with banners or protests. Sometimes it happens quietly, in a diner, between strangers, over the sound of an idling engine. And maybe that's the question left behind for all of us. When the moment comes to stand between what's right and what's easy, will we have the courage to take that step?